Dean, thank you so much for joining us on this Zoom chat. This is the first time we've spoken so many times over the phone on the radio. It's the first time we've ever actually sort of met face to face.
Yes, it's about as close as it gets nowadays, sadly, isn't it? But it's lovely to be on the show.
Yeah, I want to start with Tier 3. Watford heading into Tier 3. This is being recorded on Thursday night, so tonight. What have we done wrong, I think, is the question on quite a few people's lips, definitely on mine. 2 weeks ago, we came out of lockdown into Tier 2, and straight away, it seems, we're going into Tier 3. What's happened? Have we made a mistake?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that the reality is there's several factors at play at the moment. One, when there's more prevalence in society, it's going to spread more through that. We're hearing about this super spreader, as it were, or this sort of more active spreading strain of coronavirus, which they're doing analysis on at the moment to understand what that is and what the root of it is, as it were. But as I understand it, that won't stop the vaccine from working, and it's definitely still get picked up by tests. But it's just about the speed at which it's getting out there. And also, sadly, this the reality is what we found is even during the lockdowns, it's still spreading, but it's slowing the spread during the lockdowns. And so, if we hadn't had the lockdowns that we've had recently, who knows where we'd be right now. So it's really about trying to mitigate this. But the good news, obviously, is that we've got the vaccine coming. That's already starting to roll out. We've already got some sites in the local area where they're starting to be able to do the vaccine, and the testing is much more available than it ever has been. So there are sort of good signs out there, but I'm not one of those people that sort of wants to moan at people for not doing the right thing. I'd rather encourage them to do the right thing. I think the vast majority of people are following the guidance. They're washing their hands, they're putting the mask on, and they're socially distancing. And everyone that does that is making a difference.
If this was still spreading during the lockdown, should we have come out at all? And should we have gone into, should we have been put straight into Tier 3 is probably the question. We are so close to London as well. And should London have gone into Tier 3 too?
Well, I think when you look at the numbers, it's really been a massive spike in the past few days. So what we found is that during that time, if Watford had been on its own prior to lockdown, the second lockdown, our numbers probably were pushing us towards Tier 2 back then. But because our numbers were balanced out by the Hertfordshire numbers overall, because we were looked at as a region, that meant that we stayed in Tier 1. The numbers then kept creeping up very slowly. And we were, what I was hoping we would have stayed in Tier 2 rather than going to Tier 3. But sadly, when the numbers this week were shared with me and other MPs, for not just for Hertfordshire, but also for London and some of the wider areas, it was really clear this is really spiking now, and there's lots of different factors that are measured. And the reality is, when you've got that sort of spike, you've got to act quickly. And so whilst I was as disappointed as anyone about it, I really thought we'd be able to stay in Tier 2. The truth is, when you've got those sorts of numbers, you have to react to it, sadly.
How long are we looking at, do you think, for Tier 3? We'll talk about the Christmas period in a second. Yeah. But is this something that's going to potentially last all the way through until spring? Is this something that we're going to be in until the vaccine is, I want to say completed, but is rolled out on a wider scale? Are we probably going to be in Tier 3 till, the beginning of the end, I guess, of the COVID pandemic?
The answer is, I hope not. The truth is, I think the reality as it stands at the moment, it's one of those dangerous things of looking through a crystal ball, as it were. And normally I'm the one asking the questions. You're asking me on the select committee to Professor Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance. So just last week I said to them, how many people need to be vaccinated before lockdowns aren't needed anymore? So there's constantly a look of when can we come out of this, because nobody likes lockdowns, understandably, and I definitely don't. I didn't enter Parliament to want to vote these things through. But I think for Watford, what I would say is that at the moment, I think, the next review is just before Christmas, so around the 23rd, I believe, in 2 weeks' time. My gut feel, but this is only a gut feel, is that I'd be surprised if we came out of Tier 3 at that point. So I think we're looking at 3 or 4 weeks in this.
Well, then the 5-day Christmas period is only going to increase the spread, you would assume, with 3 households being able to meet indoors. So it is looking like we're looking like we're going to be in this for probably the best part of a couple of months, aren't we?
I hope not. I mean, all I would say is that for everyone, you know, the vaccine's rolling out, the testing's there. You know, I speak to my director of public health on as regular a basis as possible. I don't want to worry people that, you know, there's no end in sight in this. You know, the reality is, you know, the more we can do the simple thing, which is to keep ourselves separate from each other, follow the rules, wash our hands, wear the mask, and socially distance, which sound like such basic things, but actually they do make a difference. And what we've seen throughout this year is that all the lockdown measures, in effect, are there to manage the fact that we're not able to get all together again, whether that be sadly in hospitality that's been really hit. And I speak to many of our hospitality venues and pubs to sort of find out how they're going and how I could best help them. The thing I would say though with the tier three,
have you spoken to many since over the last couple of days? How are they feeling in regards to tier three? Because it's almost like for pubs, they're doing the hokey cokey at the moment. They let people in, then people have to be out, and then they're letting people back in again, and then people are coming back out again. What's their reaction been? Some of our local publicans and restaurants.
Well, one particular pub, you know, they called me to say, look, we know it's not your fault. You know, I've been speaking to them very regularly, helping try and give them the best advice that I can, and they very kindly, and I was quite touched by it actually. They called me to say, look, we know you're trying your best. We know you're helping as best you can. We know it's not your fault, but we'll just get on with it the best that we can. And you know, I really don't underestimate by any means the impact that this is having on pubs and hospitality. The good thing, if there is such a good thing as within the tier system, because it's not, you know, it's not good in any way, the fact that we're having to do this, but it is what it is, sadly, is at least there's more financial measures there. So from that side of things, actually tier three means that there's additional financial support for hospitality and for businesses and for people across Watford, so, and across the area. So in that sense, if anybody does have any questions on that side of things, just please get in touch with me. Please email me on dean.russell.mp@parliament.uk, or probably even better, go to the .gov.uk website, because that will list all the things that people can access to support them during this difficult time.
I think the big news over the last few days is Christmas, because we are having a 5-day reprieve in all tiers for Christmas, where 3 households can mix. It was one of the key talking points in Prime Minister Boris Johnson's press conference today. It is still going ahead at the moment, but I would assume that's not going to change. Do you support this? If you were the Prime Minister right now, would you be pushing for this, or would you be pushing for restrictions to stay in place?
I put it like this. The reality is this year's been really tough on people. The idea of the 3 households isn't a target to try and attain. It isn't to try and say to everybody, hey, go out and cram as many people in your house as you can over Christmas. It's about giving people a bit of a release and a bit of an opportunity to get together in a safe way, following all the guidance. There's going to be loads of messaging over the next few days coming out around how to do it really safely. But the truth is, you know, we've all heard this throughout the year, is the impact on mental health of lockdown has been immense. And I think actually giving people the choice over Christmas, over a time of year that we've probably all been looking towards that sort of, it's the end of the tunnel for the year in a way, to give people the choice of that, especially those who perhaps have been really isolated, to spend a bit of time with their families, but not hugging and, you know, not overdoing it, as it were. I think it's really important to give them that choice. But, you know, the truth is, you know, that choice comes with a responsibility of following the guidance and still being very mindful of the fact.
Do you see that being something that's actually achievable, people within these households following the guidance? And you mentioned there, it's not cramming as many people in your house as possible, but I think the reality is, when it comes to restrictions, as it has been the whole time, because that's just what people are like.
Yeah,
we push it to the outer limits. That's what we do. We go, right, we can do this. This is the line. We can't do that. So we're going to do this. We're going to get 3 households to 5 in. That's what people will do.
No, I don't think they do on the mass, though. I think the minority do, and the minority in any walk of life, in any case of these sorts of things, there are those that will take the rules to the very extreme and sometimes push beyond them. But actually, you look at most people, I think they've been following the rules. I mean, this year, I've been really proud of Watford this year. It's my first year as the MP, and I've been out in the community, safely, of course, socially distanced, but I've been out in the community doing voluntary work throughout the year, every Saturday. And as you'll know in our previous interviews, Watford General Hospital, volunteering there. And what I've seen is actually lots of people really following the guidance, taking it upon themselves to be responsible. And the catch is that what you then see online and what you see in the media and other places is usually the sort of those who have gone to the extreme, or that those who aren't following the rules stick out like a sore thumb. And I think
the point I'm trying to make is people who are staying within those rules, but pushing them to the but they are staying within the rules, so they are technically not breaking any of the guidance. However, the message coming from the government, the message coming from the Prime Minister today, is, well, this is what you can do, but we'd advise not doing it, not 3 households, 4 or 5 days. But if it's okay to do, if it's being said that this is fine, these are the guidelines, I think people will do it, regardless of the message to say, please don't do it for the whole time. I can just see it happening.
And it may well in some instances, but I think that's where the public messaging goes out that's so important. But I also do think it's so important that for people's mental health, for their relationships, having that break, I think is going to be really important. I mean, this year's been so tough. What we can't do is take our foot off the pedal, as it were, thinking that vaccine's going to be this silver bullet and solve the problems overnight. But we are starting to roll out the vaccine. And I think what we'll see over the next few months, as more and more of the vulnerable categories start to get vaccinated, that will then enable us to start to look at the balance of risk. And that's what came out in the select committee last week with Professor Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance and Dr. Harries, when I was asking them directly, and the key things that they were talking about actually is, how do we mitigate this risk? Because I'm very keen for us to come out of these lockdowns as it's safe to do, once it's safe to do so, but we've got to balance that risk. The reality is, and as they put it last week, that for COVID's out there now, it's going to be around for a long time. It's very unlikely that we're going to suddenly find a cure. Hopefully we may, but so we've got to get to a point that we can learn to live with it in a way that is safe, the same way as we do with flu and other things. So how do we balance that risk? Where do we make that decision? And I think that's where the vaccinations, the testing, all of these things play a massive part in enabling us to pull out of that in a slow and safe way. But also we need to be very mindful that this has had a massive effect on people's lives and livelihoods and their mental health. And I think we have to give a bit over Christmas, because it means so much to so many people. For me, as from a Christian perspective, it has an impact for me from a religious perspective, but also from a family perspective and a relationship perspective. And knowing I could do something, I think gives me at least a choice to know whether I do it or not. I think being told over Christmas you are not allowed to go and see one of your members of family, I think that could actually have a really detrimental effect on people.
Is this a case of, you think that people would probably do it around Christmas, would probably do it anyway? Actually, do you think that maybe when it comes to this, because and I completely agree with you with the mental health, by the way, I think it's something that we need to focus on going forward. It's been a long time now with COVID. Yeah, we're looking at, what are we, 8 months into the pandemic. If the messaging around Christmas, if the talking about relaxing the rules around Christmas had happened a bit later, was it something that was announced slightly early, before there was really an idea of the numbers having come through this another lockdown, and now with tier systems being so as flexible as they are, moving in and out? Would it have been better potentially, just because now it's you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't for the government, because you'll have people who complain that there is going to be relaxed measures because of COVID's not going away over Christmas, and there would be people, if you did decide, actually no, these measures can't be relaxed, and we have to stay in our tiers and continue to adhere to the restrictions that are currently in place. If you went back to that, the people who look forward to Christmas there'll be a backlash there. Would it have been more advisable to leave it a bit later, the announcement, do you think?
I think it would have had the same challenge, to be honest, because when you think about it, you've got to give people the opportunity to work out their plans. I mean, for a lot of people, they work out their next Christmas just when they finish the last Christmas. You know, that's what families often do. So, and also, you know, the thing of this as well is that we're not saying 4 households, 5 households. You know, we're saying 3, and that's when there's an existing bubble. Obviously, there's existing bubbles that are allowed for 2. So this isn't about suddenly opening the doors to throw house parties. It's about being in a very measured way of loosening, in a very relaxed way. And I think it's only right that we gave people time to talk about it as well with their families, time to decide who's going to be in that extra bubble. You know, that's a challenge in of itself. But I think the reality is giving people, and as I say, that bit of choice over that time. I mean, I know people across the spectrum of those who are really, really, it's going to be what gets them out of a really dark place in terms of the mental health challenges, knowing that they will be able to at least be in a proximity with their family, and they've been very much on their own for the year, who are looking forward to it, but doing it planning to do it in a very, very safe way. And then I know other people have said, well, actually, you know what, the vaccine's only a few months away. We know we can do it. That's a relief, but actually we're going to hold off. And I think there's everyone in between of that as well. And I think that's right, that people, you know, can exercise their judgment on it for a limited period of time. And I think that's right.
Let's move on to the vaccine, which you mentioned, has been mentioned a few times now. You are a member, as you mentioned before as well, of the Health and Social Care Select Committee. So you do ask the questions to the experts, and you ask the questions of the government in regards to this. Do we have a timeline with the vaccine as to when it's looking like it will have been rolled out to enough people, or enough people have been vaccinated, probably to speak a little bit more posh than I naturally do, so that we can start to think, right, it's time to cancel social distancing. I mean, cancel social distancing might be the wrong term. I think having lived through this, most people will be a bit more aware of washing their hands, being close to people, but going back to as close to normal as people will be willing to go back to at first.
So I asked that exact question, or not those exact words, but I asked Professor Whitty directly that question last week, and actually it was in a lot of the headlines, because the way it had been reported was that supposedly it was 20 million vaccinations would need to happen before we can start to release or loosen some of the lockdown measures. But actually what he actually said was much more nuanced than that, which was when you go down the vulnerable category, you start to look at, you know, the list of 11 categories that we're going through at the moment. When you look at all those numbers of the different types, different people, different ages and all those things, you're probably looking around the 20 million mark. So that was the sort of general gist of it. But the point actually that both him and Sir Patrick Vallance were making was this balance of risk. At which point, you know, is it the case that actually the hospitals won't be getting as full, that actually the risk to life isn't as bad, because people are recovering better. I mean, the drugs this year have been much better, but people are still having to go into hospital to recover from it. So I think there is a big play there.
What age group are we looking at for that? Is it the over 60s? Is it the over 40s? Is it the over 30s? What age?
So in terms of when you go down that list,
what's the
so
age?
I think he was basing it, if I recall correctly, I think he was basing it around the list of 11. So I think there's 11 categories at the moment that go down. So I think it goes down to sort of 50s, 60s, but it's also other elements as well. So people who are more at risk because of health issues. There's more nuance to it, but effectively it's about at what point can you within the community start to say, well, look,
do we have
politically,
a time frame? Do we have?
Well, that's and you're right to ask the question, because I was trying to get the same info last week. My take on it was that you're looking at spring at least until you've got some of the really highly vulnerable people vaccinated. My gut feel is you're probably looking more towards summer for the much wider vaccination. Hopefully it'll be much sooner than that, but I don't think we're going to be, you know, having an announcement that all measures are going to be lifted in February, you know, but I do think hopefully we can start to tease them out a bit more, pull them out, and hopefully perhaps look at the tiers in a slightly different way. I mean, the thing that people perhaps don't realise is that us MPs, we're just as affected, but also we have our opinions on what ways of doing things. We often voice them. Some of us voice them in the chamber, and often we voice them behind the scenes as well. So, the government is very, very aware that lockdowns aren't popular, but also I think we've got to also understand the balance of risk and the impact of this in so many different ways, because the reality is if our hospitals do get full, we're in a really bad place, not just for people with COVID, but for people with non-COVID who have those longer term health issues, that we need to make sure hospitals are still running normally for all of those people as well. So it's not just about COVID, it's about the bigger picture and how it affects everything else.
Just finally on COVID, when it comes to the hospitals, you mentioned a few times how in contact with them you are. How is Watford General Hospital coping as compared to March? Is it coping better? How are they dealing with the current numbers that have led to us going into tier 3?
Well, I have to say, I think they're doing an incredible job. They've been very good at managing this throughout the whole process, especially during the first lockdown. I'd have calls probably every day just to check if they needed me to do anything, if I could help with anything in terms of communications or anything like that. And also, of course, I've said it a few times, but the volunteering is helpful, because I saw on the front line what was happening, and that often meant I was asking questions to government and on the select committees from what I was seeing, not just from what I was reading in paperwork. So that was really valuable. But I think they're in a much better place. The numbers are increasing, there's no doubt about that. But I do think there's the processes they've got in place, the staff are incredible there. And I say that having met them as well. So I'm not just saying it as a politician, trying to be nice. They are amazing there, and the volunteer team that's been working there has been incredible. So I think actually when you look at the process and the management and the strategy, they seem to be, they've got a really clear plan. We've also got an excellent director of public health in a guy called Jim McManus, who looks after the county. And I speak to him probably on a daily basis at times, just to catch up, see if there's any more to be done. And on that front, the extra support and the insights and the approaches around testing that he's looking at and how we'll roll out vaccinations is really important. So it all ties together. I think that the catch is that, the hospital in of itself isn't an island. It's impacted by what the rest of us do, and vice versa. So but so far I'd say they've been exemplary in their approach and maintaining as well as best as they can the non-COVID treatments as well.
Okay, let's move on through a couple of questions quickly before I get to some listener questions, because I did promise the listener that I would be asking their questions to you. Firstly, Brexit has sort of reared its head again this week with the negotiations going on with the European Union about a potential deal. A deal looking a lot more likely than it did earlier in negotiations. However, there's still a high possibility of a no-deal Brexit. Do you support no deal still? Would you be in support of that if that is the outcome, if we do so crash out of Europe, so to speak?
I think that's the point, actually, because I don't think it is crashing out of Europe anymore. I mean, we've put a lot of, if you think with all this other stuff going on, we've been doing so many trade deals around the world. I mean, it's been incredible. Every week it feels at times going in and having a new question or comment or statement around a trade deal. So my view is that I'm hopeful we'll get a deal. I am really hopeful, but I'm not nervous about if we have to go down what we're now calling an Australian deal approach. Yeah. I will need to make sure we manage that properly, and I know there'll be people listening who are nervous about that and worried about it. So they're very welcome to get in touch with me if they've got specific concerns, for their business or anything that I can guide them on. But I think in reality, we've spent a year trying to get to a good place on this, and there have been some really real distance in some of the negotiation points. And it feels like this past week or so, they've been aired even stronger, but also potentially, perhaps it's cleared the air enough to be able to get through and get to the right point. But for me, as a member of Parliament this year, it's been really clear to me the importance of being able to have decisions made within our Parliament for our country. And some people sort of say, well, so what about sovereignty? But actually it is really important to have that sovereignty. And for a trade deal shouldn't start to affect the way that we look at the laws of our own land or, the borders of the country. And, it's not about I don't want to rehash the whole conversation about Brexit, but the reality is the country voted for it. We came out at the start of the year. Now we're trying to get a good trade deal with the EU, and if there isn't one that's possible this next few weeks, and we have to go down an Australian route, then so be it. And I feel confident we'll still do well out of that.
You just briefly touched on the year in Parliament now, because we're around the year anniversary. This year's been so crazy, losing track of time.
Yeah.
Have you found it? Have you found being Watford's Member of Parliament?
Oh, it's an absolute honour, and it's an honour, a privilege. I love the role. I wake up every day knowing that my job is to help people, and that really is the case. I mean, I was chatting to my team, and we've just done something like 8,500 cases. So that's getting people into Cambridge University, getting people back from Peru, helping them get a bounce back loan when they've been turned down. Literally anything and everything you can imagine. And that's just in the background of working in the chamber and doing the select committees and going to community events and helping support people and going out and being part of the community. And so it's been an absolute privilege. It's been a difficult year. I can't deny that. With coronavirus, it's added some layers. But part of the reason why it's been difficult with coronavirus, besides the obvious challenges, is that I like to go out and meet people and get to know them, and so that's been stifled in the most part. But what it has done in the opposite side is that I've spent most of my time volunteering rather than going out and perhaps knocking on doors, and in a way actually I fell deeper in the community. I moved here back in I've always had strong links with Watford. My wife's from Watford, and so I know it very, very well. My daughter was born here as well. But when I moved here in February, my thought was down the road and I'll get to meet everyone, and then lockdown happened. But I love it, and it really is such a privilege to do it, because it's the job where every hour is different. Over the course of today, I've been involved with the Human Rights Committee. I'm now speaking to you, which is fantastic. I asked a question in the chamber earlier about very serious issues around modern slavery. Every hour is different, and it's a privilege to be able to represent Watford in that way and be their voice within this amazing building.
Right, we're going to get through some listener questions now, and I'm going to need you to keep your answers relatively short, just because there's quite a few to get through. I know that I don't pay for Zoom, so it'll run out eventually. So coming off social media, the first one's from Sandra. She said, I worked through the first lockdown in March for the NHS and heard you giving them your support. So now how can you support the Christmas relaxation when the NHS will then be put under even more pressure in January as a result of this? A leading doctor has said this morning, as have many, this will be a disaster waiting to happen, and the police will not intervene because of a lack of resources. So therefore, will the Tory government hold its hands up when it's responsible for thousands more deaths in the early months of next year?
Well, it goes to my answer earlier. I think we have to really get the balance right. And at the end of the year, to say people physically can't, it's illegal for them to go and see their family on Christmas Day. I think that would have a detrimental effect on them in many ways, including from a mental health perspective in particular. And I think actually we need to give people a sense of hope, and give them a bit of a break. But what we are saying, and what the messaging will be very clearly, is do it in a very, very safe way. And you also don't have to do it. It's not enforced that you have 3 households. It's just adding 1 extra household to existing bubbles in that sense. But ultimately, it's about giving people the faith and the belief that they follow the rules, and but also are aware of the challenges that can come if they don't follow the guidance.
I'm going to group Keith and Karen's questions together here. So there's 2 questions, 2 parts, because they relate to each other. So Keith has asked, why did you fail to support the provision of free school meals for poor kids during school holidays? And then Karen has almost added to that question with, why did it take a young footballer, Marcus Rashford is talking about, to make the government U-turn on the decision of free school meals?
Great question. There's three parts to my answer. First of all, I didn't vote against free school meals. I was saying that I supported the government approach, which was a much more targeted approach, which actually has meant that there's far more money and far more support going through councils to support kids. The second part is what's called an opposition day motion. So even if I'd voted for it, it wouldn't have made any difference. It wasn't a vote for a bill or a law. It was a debate that's put forward by the opposition, and they get the opportunity to do that throughout the year, to do an opposition day motion. So even if I had voted for it, it wouldn't have made a difference. And then and I prefer to, say what I feel is the right thing to do, which is to target people and children properly. And thirdly, it's been something throughout the year I've done a lot of work on to look at food wastage. And next year I'm going to be launching a food wastage and a linking into the environment as well, strategy for Watford. And I've been chatting to groups already on that. I think there's some really great work that can be done. I'm on the all-party parliamentary group. In fact, I'm a vice chair for it, the National Food Strategy. So this isn't something that I blindly voted against to be cruel. It was a case of, do we continue for a few more holidays, because it was just for that 1 week that the opposition day was trying to push for support until Easter. What the government has done is actually put provisions, much better provisions, and an awful lot more money behind it until the end of Christmas next year, so that we can find a much better longer term solution. And for anyone who thinks that's a U-turn, they should go back to the manifesto from 2019, and they'll see in there that was always part of the plan, to have a much better, sophisticated way of helping kids who need support. And that, for me, means we have to not just look at how we make sure that they're fed, which is critical, but also how we look after them with their well-being, with their support, and with a network to make sure that we can help them and their family, short and long term, so we can lift them out of poverty, which is all about the levelling up and the Build Back Better approach as well.
Let's move on to Peter's question, who has asked, do you see yourself as more of a backbench MP or a future minister? If minister, which department would you most like to oversee?
Well, I think the thing with politics, you never know where you'll end up. I mean, for me, I'm absolutely passionate about mental health. The launch of that this year with the Prime Minister for the launch of the 1,000 mental health first aiders that I'm delivering with the brilliant work of the Chamber of Commerce and other community groups, and supported by Camelot, is a practical way that I'm helping do that on that level. But I also talk very regularly to people like the Minister for Mental Health in terms of how we can look at government policy. I'm going to be doing something next year to help on that front. So for me, it's not so much about, what role might I get in the future or titles. They don't really bother me too much, but what can I actually achieve and do? And I look back at this past year, the mental health initiative, the funding to explore the beaching line between St Albans and Watford, the funding for the hospital, the £400 million that Matt Hancock has announced is definitely coming our way. If I look at what I've achieved this year, I feel quite proud, but there's so much more to do. And so for me, I hope that for many, many years to come, I can continue to support Watford and support people to get outcomes and not just try and chase titles. But of course, the more position you get, the more difference you can make, I guess. But for me, it's not about being a backbencher to sit on the back benches. It's about actually getting things done in the community. And hopefully people have seen that I've started to do that.
And final question, actually from the Watford Liberal Democrats. As a member of the Health Committee, will you be asking for an inquiry into the £500 million in PPE contracts being given to Conservative donors?
Oh, wow. Okay, so first of all, it's a Health and Social Care Committee. They should be.
Sorry, yeah, I should have said.
Secondly, I think the key part for that is that actually, when we look at the issues we had around PPE at the start of the year, there was a massive push by everyone to try and make PPE and make sure we were secure on it. If you look at where we were at the start of the year, only 1% of our PPE was from the UK. Actually, most of it was coming from China. We're now at the point of 70%. So we're much more self-sufficient. We've got much better processes in place. I'm sure if they want to ask that question in the chamber, they're very welcome to through their MPs, and I'm sure they will. But, I think for me, it's about how do we make sure that people were safe this year. And there's a lot of political point scoring, which I think is such a shame, because throughout this year I've worked very closely with every party. I've worked very closely across interfaith. I've worked with every community to make sure that I get results on the ground. And sadly, political point scoring often I think can get in the way of that. So for me, it's about what results do we need? How do we deliver on that? In the select committee, they're welcome to go back and watch all of them, because actually we've gone through some pretty in-depth and challenging questions to government, and I've asked my own side, very tough questions this year in public, because the role of the role of opposition is to scrutinise, and I think actually this year often it's been the government side that's had to scrutinise far more. So I think in terms of the work that we've done to make sure we're holding our own government to account, and I feel very proud that I've done that. And
the final question just comes from myself, and we are running out of time, so to make this short. What are you planning to do for Christmas?
You know what? It'd be nice to have just a couple of days off, to be honest. I've literally not had a day off, and I'm not complaining because I love the role, but I've not had a day off since the election. And so actually, I think a couple of days over Christmas just to switch off and perhaps not check email for a day would be nice. But, like I say, we've done 8,500 cases this year. That's a lot of emails we've had to deal with. But I think me and my team, we've had something like 50,000 emails, and we're not a big team by any means. So, I think not looking at a screen for a little while would be nice. But I love doing what I do, so it comes with its own energy, and I'm sure over those couple of days I'll probably end up sneaking a few peeks at what's going on in the news and elsewhere, and see where I can help in Watford.
So quite one with the family then, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dean, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. A bit longer form than the usual radio interview. It's been wonderful. So Watford's Member of Parliament, Dean Russell, thank you so much.
Thank you.